Hi, everybody. I hope you're all staying safe and warm and that you're going to have a nice, relaxing day off tomorrow. I wanted to start by reviewing the homework that we've got coming up. Obviously, next week is UD spring break, so we won't be meeting. I will be around, so if you need me, feel free to email me. But when we return, the first thing we're going to do when we come back is have our new teacher panel. And that's when some recent graduates from XEE come back and talk to the group. It's really a nice time to hear about their experiences with the job search, with student teaching, and their first years of teaching. So that should be a lot of fun. We usually have like a whole class presentation, and then I give you some time to talk to them in smaller settings if you'd like. The DVEC job fair is that week, first week in April, so make sure that you register at Career Services and let everybody know if you plan to attend that. It is an excused absence, as we mentioned in class. Just a heads up of what's coming up the week after that. You'll probably notice that there's really very little to do in terms of reading or assignments to turn in from here forward, because I know you're in the thick of student teaching, working on your PAL project and your EdTPA. So continue to work on PAL. We'll do some work around your data with PAL, and then you do have this short assessment reflection to do. And I think that's something that gets you thinking about the process of creating a reflection or creating an assessment, um, administering it, and then reflecting on the results, which is something that'll serve you well for both EdTPA and PAL. And it's just a shorter assignment, and you can find that linked here. But that's not due for 3 weeks or so. You can just look at it now if you'd like. So, some announcements. Our party is moving forward. We did have to move the time to 7 o'clock. We thought we'd have to be able to do it at 6, but we have to push it back to 7 because of the class schedule, but I think that should be fine. I wanted to let you know that I checked with Cindy Holland about the letter of interest, and she said that a cover letter, a letter of application, and a letter of interest all are indeed the same thing. This is the midpoint of the semester, so just want to give you a heads up that I'm going to be checking with your field instructors soon to get an update on your student teaching binders. Remember that you need to have all of your lesson plans and reflections in there. Sometimes student teachers get a little bit behind with the reflections, and that's a problem because it really can pile up very quickly. So stay on top of those, do them daily. Some people even find it helpful to do them every class, as soon as you can right after class. So make sure that those are organized and in order, and that is a big part of your 492 grade. So you want to make sure that that's in good shape. And okay, so what we're going to be doing today is just reviewing some of the things that we were going to discuss in class, and then I've got a couple things to send you home with. So first of all, I just wanted to remind you about what we were doing last week before we had our guest speakers, and we were talking about different ways that you could respond to someone. We did that little role-playing activity, and we found that the first 7 here or so are not that helpful, but when you can demonstrate some empathy, a lot of times your friend or the person you're talking to or your student can move forward. So I didn't have a chance to show you this, but I think if you're dealing with students who are showing emotion, showing frustration, these can be some things that are helpful. First is just to listen and really be paying attention to them. Acknowledge their feelings with a neutral word. Note that you're not having to agree with their feelings. You just are understanding that that is how they are feeling. So just saying something like, I see, or oh, can validate that they feel that way. If they seem a little bit overly emotional, you might give their feelings a name. If they haven't already said that, oh, that sounds frustrating, or that must make you feel really angry. And it sounds silly, but you may realize this from your own experience. When you have somebody do that for you, it helps you articulate it yourself, and also just it shows that that person was listening with full attention. And then number 4, giving them their wishes and fantasy and or brainstorming a solution together. This kind of depends on the situation, but sometimes, you might just kind of make a joke of it, not to make light of it, but just like, oh yeah, I wish that you never had to write any papers, or oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if we had a week's worth of snow days coming up? If they seem ready for it after you've acknowledged their feelings, maybe it's time to think about a possible solution. Sometimes it's helpful to ask the student if the student wants some help with the situation, especially if it's something related to class. If it's a personal thing, I think sticking through 1 through 3 is probably a good idea. So just some tips about managing, especially when students get very angry or emotional or seem very frustrated. Okay, so I wanted to go through what we were going to talk about today with mock interviews. And feel free to pause this video and do some of the things I'm listing on the prompts if you'd like. There's always going to be a point in the job search process where someone's going to ask you to tell about yourself. So I would suggest that you pause, take 5 minutes, and just brainstorm that introductory speech that you're going to give. A few sentences. What's really exciting to you about teaching? What is unique about what you bring with your own academic background and your experiences? One thing that every graduate of this program can say is that you've had a rich series of field experiences with multiple different schools and in different types of environments. So I think that's something certainly to play up. And then a little bit about why you're interviewing for this particular job. So it might be helpful to jot some of those ideas down at this point. This is going back to something that Cindy said a couple weeks ago. You'll often see this kind of behavior-based questions in interviews. And this is so, the district or the team has created a predetermined set of questions. They're asking them of every candidate, and they're designed to examine what you've done in past situations. A lot of them are sort of open-ended, like tell me about or describe, and as Cindy advised, using sort of a situation or a story format is a helpful way to frame these kind of questions. Describe a situation, what you did, and how the situation was resolved. And again, it's not the case that has to be, and everyone lived happily ever after. There doesn't always have to be a wonderful, clean solution. With these kinds of questions, we've touched on this before, employers are really looking for responses that are focused on students. So student-centered, they focus on student learning, they talk about student success, and they demonstrate your commitment to all students. So what I was planning to do was have you practice answering some of these questions with a partner, and you can find the list of questions on Canvas under Files. So just read them over. They're sort of similar, List A and List B, just phrased a little bit differently. But in my experience, and I've run this list by several other folks, this is a pretty comprehensive list of the kinds of questions that are going to get asked in interviews. So be familiar with those. Here's one thing that a principal advised about giving interviews and answering questions. We always ask a question about how to deal with behavior. We always want to hear about positive, not punitive, approaches that the teacher uses. We always want to hear in an interview answer what works best with students and what the teacher can do to improve their instructional strategies to reach more students, define the strengths of each student. If we hear the above, we feel confident that the discipline will be handled appropriately. So that relationship piece that Jessica and Jenny talked about, also just note how many times students come up in this response. I just can't stress this enough. All right, one thing you might not think about is the fact that you're expected to have questions. So be sure that you prepare some questions for any job that you go to ahead of time. Again, you might want to pause and brainstorm some questions that you could possibly ask. I think this is a good opportunity for you to determine fit. So you might ask about mentoring programs. You might ask about resources for student success, mentoring for you, I mean, as a new teacher. Talk about how collegial are teachers in the building. What are the strengths they see of the faculty and of the students? What are things that they're trying to improve? So there's not really a one right answer to this kind of thing. Like there's different kinds of questions you can ask, but it really is an opportunity for you to understand more about the culture of the building. So take advantage of that opportunity. And some of this material is from a book that I purchased a couple of years ago. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was your PAL project, just to give you a heads up about presenting your data, because you're all doing some kind of pre and post measure of student learning. You may or may not know that if you create an Excel spreadsheet of your data, you can really nice and easily convert those into charts. So the examples you're going to see on the next slides are all from a little data table that I made very quickly in Excel, and then I could just make that into a chart or into a graph and paste it right into my PowerPoint in this case, but you could put it into a Word document. So a bar graph and the next one, the area graph, are both good for showing sort of overall student performance. So I have students A through J. I only have a score out of 100. For some reason it went up to 120. But here I'm just showing the results of one assessment, say. So we can see that the lowest one was about 55 and the highest one was about 100%. So this is showing me one. And then I could stack these with one the first assessment and then the post-assessment if I wanted to for each student. It would show a contrast. The area graph does the same thing, just a different kind of visual representation, but again, it's got the students along the bottom. A stacked marked line graph, if you choose this option, this is a good place to show improvement. If you've got an overall improvement, you can see here. So imagine this was pre and post test scores. Obviously, I wouldn't have 200%, but I was trying to show like a really clear difference on the PowerPoint. So the same student A got a 55 and then got 140 or whatever on the second one. And so you can see that, in the second series, all of the scores were above. So it's another way of displaying the data. Other things to think about as you report your data, you may know that one good thing to do is to calculate the average, the mean, and show the average for assessment 1 and then the average for assessment 2. You may see an overall improvement. Another helpful piece of data to include could be the median, and the median is the number that divides the score in half. So in other words, half of the students' scores are above the median and half of them are below. And the median helps control for outliers. If you've got a couple of student scores that are really high or really low, showing the median could be different than the mean, and it might give you a more accurate representation without those outliers. And then the mode is also another helpful thing to show. Sometimes it could be the most common score in the group. Maybe you didn't have a whole lot of high scores, but you had some solid moderate scores, and that's actually where most people scored. So that can be a helpful thing to report as well. So just a note at the bottom, usually the average is helpful, but if there's outliers, the median mode can help de-emphasize them in reporting. So you might want to calculate mean, median, and mode for your data and then report on all of those if they're different. All right, if you've started to work on the PAL project at all, you'll see that it's expected to start with an executive summary or an abstract. It is a self-contained short summary of the whole paper, including the results. It reports the scope, purpose, results, and significance. And I have some examples under files in Canvas. They're not perfect. They're the ones that we examined earlier in the semester for possible topics, but just something to go forward with if you're starting to work on that part of the project. Also on Canvas under PAL models, you'll see one sample PAL project. I have not taught seminars since we moved to this project, so I didn't have any of my own students, but I did get one from 2 years ago from Dr. Alvarez. And then you can also see some STAR project models, which is a very similar assignment. It just wasn't as strongly focused on student learning, but the ones that are in there are quite solid, so if you wanted to see some examples, that might be helpful for you. Okay, so the last things for today, you will need to do the midterm evaluation. We were going to do that on paper in class. Instead, I have put it under quizzes. So it's right here. It's due at 7:30 tonight, midterm course evaluation, and you can just answer it here on Canvas. Finally, here under conferences, I'm going to open a conference at 5 o'clock. I really, really strongly encourage you to take that hour to work on your PAL and or your EdTPA. Remember, we were going to do that in class, and I was going to be available for questions. So I really strongly encourage you to take that hour, just sit down with what you've got going so far, and if you have questions, enter this conference. You just log in on Canvas and go to conferences. You should be able to chat with me here. Of course, you can email me other questions if you have them, but because we were going to have this time set aside, I really, like I said, strongly encourage you to take advantage of it here tonight. You're still going to be done a whole lot more earlier than we would have been if we had met in person. I think that's it. I won't see you next week, so I'll see you in a couple weeks. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions or concerns. Oh, one thing I should note is that the teaching employment portfolio can be submitted either in hard copy or on Canvas. That's how I meant it to be, but the description was a little off, so I just changed that. So you can either turn it in on Canvas or you can give me a hard copy in class on April 3rd. Have a great night, everybody.